Yes, sir.
Thank you, Judge. Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Ernest J. Bordini, PhD.
And what do you currently do?
I am a licensed psychologist, specialty in clinical and forensic neuropsychology.
And you had to get some education to be able to have that title?
I did my undergraduate studies at Boston College with a bachelor's in psychology, graduated scholar of the college, came here to graduate school in 1979 at the University of Florida in the Department of Clinical and Health Psychology. I earned both a master's and a PhD in clinical and health psychology and a minor in neuropsychology. Did my internship at the VA Medical Center, did rotations in neuropsychology. I actually created a rotation in forensic psychology for myself during that time. Alcohol, substance abuse, and just general mental health. And I did postgraduate studies with behavioral health associates, did a lot of work in a child psychiatric hospital during that period of time, got licensed.
And so when did you become, when did you get licensed?
Licensed in 1989.
And so you've been practicing since 1989?
Yes.
All right. Have you provided testimony in any courts?
I've testified in federal courts in Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. I think I've testified in most districts in the state of Florida.
And have you always testified for the defense, or have you testified for a variety of reasons?
I do both civil and criminal, so the definitions differ, but in terms of criminal cases, I've testified for the defense, for the state, and at times I've been court appointed.
Have you been published in your field?
Yes.
And do you continue to stay abreast of the new changes in your field?
I try to.
And the witness for what here? State?
No questions.
All right. Thank you. Now, I contacted you to assist in this case, and if we just talk about the initial timing of when you started and what you did to get familiar with regards to the
I don't know exactly when, but I was contacted earlier in the year about the current case. We scheduled some initial dates to start the evaluation. Unfortunately, my wife came back from vacation with COVID, and I got it from her, and it postponed things for about a month. So the actual evaluations didn't start till July of this year. In the meantime, I had quite a few records to review, videotapes, medical records of Taylor, Navy records from Ms. Williams, investigation reports, photographs, witness statements, and so forth.
And that's all contained in your report summary that we have marked as an exhibit into this court. So I'll spare you going through all the details, but for the court's record, all those items are contained in that. The procedures that you administered as well were contained in that summary, which we'll talk about during your testimony. But is it accurate, the summary that you provided of all of it?
I believe it is.
Okay. How much time did you actually get to spend with Ms. Williams?
I spent 3 full days, which would mostly be 9 to 5. There was one day where she wasn't brought back after a break at the jail, so that one probably ended a little early, around 3. Well, she left at 3:30. We waited till about 4:30 for her to come back and ask the guards a few times, and then anyhow, it didn't work out. And then there was another half day, so it was 3.5 days, more or less, of time with her.
And what were your initial impressions?
My initial impressions was she had it was striking in that when I saw her initially, she was very demure, extremely soft-spoken, kind of talking almost in a whisper. very poor eye contact in terms of tending to look down. Communication was kind of slow to establish. She would tend to shake her head in a very stereotypic kind of way when it wasn't something she wanted to talk about, or whether it was something that she wanted to say no to. And she also had the very characteristic giggle that would occur across the evaluation. Her affect was generally flat, and then you'd have these giggles. Sometimes she would settle down and have a little bit more of a normal response to a little bit of humor or response. When we talked about Taylor, she clearly emotionally changed, so she would be a lot more anxious, a little bit more depressed. The giggle stuff kind of stopped. She looked a lot more serious, sad. So there were these affective changes that clearly made her seem very odd. So some of my my initial impressions, aside from what I had, in terms of the history, was I was really wondering whether she had a bit of a schizoaffective disorder. I eventually didn't feel like she met the full criteria for that, but certainly some schizoaffective stuff, just from the initial interaction, was like added to my list of things to try to, figure out as I was going through the diagnostic process.
Just while we're on that, what is this schizoaffect?
Schizoaffective disorder is sort of a combination of symptoms of schizophrenia and mood disorders affect. Typically, people have odd, unusual affect. It's usually present across situations and different things like that. Clearly, she could fly into a different role when in terms of her military role and stuff like that. So it seemed inconsistent with some of the leadership qualities and other things that were reflected in her military record. And so since it wasn't really present across a lot of situations, I didn't feel like she would meet full criteria. But I think she was, someone who had a bit of a fragmented personality, that, she could put on a particular role and present in a certain way, and that underneath it, there was a lot of trauma and other schizoidish and more significant psychopathology.
And so did that impression ultimately change, or did you have a final opinion that we can talk about versus going through the individual tests?
Well, my process is to try to not come to any conclusions until I actually finish the final summary and report. Basically, if you start to make conclusions too early, you stop looking and you start finding what you want to look for. So I went through a process, and the process involves gathering history, kind of reviewing my clinical observations and intuition, looking at the test results and seeing what fits there. I felt there was a lot I didn't get from the interviews. The mitigation interviews helped. She seemed to open up a lot more about childhood traumas and some of the sexual issues, which is not surprising since I'm a strange man coming in and asking her about that. But what really struck me is when I started looking at the psychological test results, it really confirmed for me that there was a lot more underneath the surface. There was quite a wide range of psychopathology that I eventually settled on in terms of final diagnostic impressions. I certainly considered antisocial personality disorders, paranoid personality disorders, schizoid personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder. Again, because her functioning wasn't consistent across a lot of different settings, there was variability to it. That largely precludes the personality disorder diagnosis. And in terms of the antisocial personality disorder, she acknowledged some antisocial behaviors, but really didn't have antisocial attitudes, and again, wasn't true across things, and she certainly doesn't have a long criminal history that would qualify for that, or severe conduct problems as a child. So I kind of settled in terms of the personality dynamics on schizoid, paranoid and avoidant personality features, which she's got some, that's part of her makeup. It's not fully a DSM diagnosis of paranoid or personality disorders. In terms of looking at things, we think about, affective disorders and anxiety disorders. And one of the things that, early on in the interview, and she'd gone through this material a couple of times because the mitigation specialist had helped her with the history forms because she has real serious visual impairments. As you can see in the courtroom, she's got her head really close to the thing, to her papers. That's because she can't see very well. The mitigation specialist helped her complete both history forms regarding herself and on Taylor. I had her fill out a history form on Taylor because part of what I'm trying to understand is any of Taylor's dynamics or characteristics which would have made her prone to being abused, and also to try to understand the relationship that Breanna had with Taylor. And so we went through both of those.